everyone, welcome back. You know we love to go deep on stuff you guys send our way, and this one is no joke.
No kidding.
This time, we're diving into the speech by Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré.
Right, the one calling for Black Americans and Jamaicans to, return to Africa.
Yeah, exactly. It's been making headlines and people are buzzing about it, so we wanted to break it down.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've got the speech itself, obviously, but we're also looking at some YouTubers who have been kind of reacting to it and interpreting it.
Yeah, their takes are pretty interesting. They have some pretty strong opinions.
Yeah. One of them is super on board with Traoré's message, and the other is hold on a sec, this is kind of scary.
Totally different perspectives.
Yeah, so we'll try to give you the full picture,
Yeah.
all the different angles, and you can decide what you think.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the video starts with Traoré speaking to a group of people from the African diaspora in Ouagadougou.
That's Burkina Faso's capital, right?
Yeah, you got it. And he's thanking them for coming, especially because, things haven't been super stable there lately.
Right, not exactly the safest place to visit right now.
Exactly. So it's kind of a big deal that they're there.
Totally, and he kind of addresses that.
Yeah, he's like, I know there are these negative perceptions of the country, but your presence here, counters that narrative.
Yeah, it's a powerful statement.
For sure. And then he kind of launches into this whole explanation of what he calls the imperialist worldview.
Oh, yeah. He uses that triangle metaphor.
Yeah, with the empire of good at the top, and at the bottom you've got the evil empire and the slave empire.
I mean, it's a pretty simple visual, but I think he gets his point across,
Yeah. He's basically saying that this whole framework is designed to, justify exploitation and control.
Exactly. And he brings up all these examples to illustrate his point.
Like what?
Well, like the collapse of the Soviet Union, for example.
Okay.
And then the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how countries like Iran get demonized,
Yeah, it's like he's connecting these historical events to this bigger system of power.
Right. Like who gets to define what's good and what's evil?
And who benefits from those definitions, right?
Exactly.
So one of the YouTubers we're looking at is totally buying what Traoré is selling.
Yeah, he's like, this guy is a straight-up truth teller.
He calls him a visionary leader.
Yeah. He's like, Traoré's not like those other politicians and technocrats and businessmen.
He represents something different, something new.
And that's appealing to a lot of people, I think.
Especially those who are, fed up with the establishment,
Totally. And remember, Traoré himself came to power through a coup. So he's already seen as kind of a disruptor.
Right, so he's got that outsider image going for him.
Yeah, that definitely adds to his appeal for some.
But then you've got this other commentator who's a little more cautious.
Yeah, he sees this call for Black Americans to return to Africa as potentially dangerous.
Like a threat to the West.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He thinks that people in power are deliberately making it hard for Black Americans to return because they're afraid of what might happen.
Like what?
Well, he thinks they're afraid of the fresh ideas and the drive for success that Black Americans might bring.
Interesting. So he's basically saying that there's this conspiracy to keep Africa down.
In a way, yeah. He thinks that a strong and united Africa would challenge the existing global order.
And that some people don't want that to happen.
Right.
Wow. It's a lot to unpack. But I think it's important to hear these different perspectives,
For sure. We have to be aware of all the different angles.
Okay, so let's go back to Traoré's speech itself. What's he actually asking people to do?
Well, he's urging people to spread the message of African unity and to, come back and invest in the continent.
So it's not just about returning to your roots, it's about, actively building a new future for Africa.
Right. It's a call to action.
And it raises a lot of questions.
Definitely. Is this actually realistic?
Yeah. And what would it look like in practice?
And how would it affect both Africa and the West?
So many things to consider.
Totally. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
I mean, it's a lot to think about, right? Actually, moving back to Africa.
Yeah, it's not exactly a simple decision.
There's a lot to consider.
Definitely. And I think it's important to remember that, this back to Africa idea isn't new,
Right, it's been around for a while.
Yeah, there have been movements like this before, each with their own, motivations and challenges.
Yeah, what comes to mind for you?
Well, Marcus Garvey, for example.
Oh, yeah, in the early 1900s.
Exactly. He was all about Black people, reclaiming Africa as their homeland.
And building a powerful, independent nation.
Right. And then more recently, you have things like Ghana's Year of Return initiative.
Well, yeah, that was in 2019, right?
Yeah, they encouraged people of African descent to come and connect with their heritage.
So there's definitely a precedent for this kind of movement.
For sure. But I think what makes Traoré's call different is his emphasis on unity and self-determination.
Okay, so it's not just about individuals going back, it's about like a collective effort.
Exactly. It's about coming together to invest in Africa and shape its future.
He's talking about like empowering the entire continent.
Right. And I think that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah.
That desire for belonging and agency.
Yeah, it's like a deeper longing than just like wanting to visit your ancestral homeland.
Totally. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself.
And that commentator who was so into Traoré's message, she definitely picked up on that.
Yeah, he was talking about how Traoré represents a new kind of leadership.
Someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And that's appealing to a lot of people who are disillusioned with the current state of affairs.
But then you've got that other commentator who's more worried about the implications of all this.
Right. He's concerned about how Western powers might react.
He thinks they'll feel threatened.
Yeah, he basically thinks there's this effort to keep Africa down.
Because a strong and united Africa would challenge their interests.
Exactly. It's all about power dynamics,
Yeah.
you know.
Who has it, who wants it, and who's afraid of losing it?
Right. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're discussing this.
So it seems like Traoré's call for return is about more than just geography.
Oh, absolutely. It's a challenge to the existing world order.
It's about power and control.
And it forces us to confront these narratives about Africa's place in the world.
So what do you think? Are those narratives accurate?
That's a big question.
It is, and I think it's one that each individual has to answer for themselves.
But I think it's important to at least be aware of those narratives and to question them.
Yeah, like, why do we think about Africa the way we do?
And who benefits from those ways of thinking?
Right, because those ways of thinking have real-world consequences.
And they affect how we interact with each other, how we allocate resources, how we make decisions.
So it's not just an abstract philosophical debate.
No, it's very real.
Okay, so back to Traoré's call to action.
Right, he's urging people to spread the message of African unity and to invest in the continent.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. Like, what are the practical steps involved in returning to Africa?
And what are the potential benefits and challenges?
Yeah, what opportunities and obstacles might people encounter?
And how would this movement affect both Africa and the West?
Would it be a positive or negative thing?
That's hard to say. It depends on a lot of factors.
And you were talking about potentially massive shifts in global power.
Right. And we can't forget about the moral and ethical dimensions of this issue either.
Like what?
Well, Traoré brought up the history of slavery and exploitation.
Right.
And that leads to the question of reparations.
How do we address the wrongs of the past?
And what does true justice look like?
Those are tough questions.
They are. And there are no easy answers.
But they're questions that we need to be asking.
Absolutely. We can't just ignore them.
And I think Traoré's speech is forcing us to confront them.
It's pushing us to think critically about these issues.
And to engage with different perspectives.
Even if those perspectives make us uncomfortable.
So I guess the question for you, the listener, is, what do you think?
What resonates with you?
What challenges your preconceived notions?
And what questions are you left with?
This deep dive is really just the beginning of the conversation.
We're just scratching the surface here.
There's so much more to explore.
And so many different angles to consider.
But hopefully this has given you a starting point.
And some food for thought.
Yeah. Because ultimately it's up to each individual to decide what they believe.
And to act on those beliefs.
We're living in a time of great change and uncertainty.
But that also means there's incredible potential for progress.
So let's keep the conversation going.
Let's keep exploring. Keep questioning and keep pushing for a better future.
It's like, you know, as we've been talking about all this, it's hard not to feel like Traoré's speech is kind of a sign of the times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it does feel like it's tapping into something bigger, a kind of a shift that's happening.
Like a growing sense that the old ways of doing things, they're just not cutting it anymore.
Exactly. There's a lot of disillusionment with the way things are.
Yeah.
And people are looking for leaders who are willing to, like, shake things up a bit.
And you gotta admit, Traoré's definitely doing that. I mean, he's not afraid to, you know, speak his mind and challenge the people in charge and offer a whole different vision for the future.
And that's exactly what makes him so threatening to some, right? Because he represents a change, a disruption to the power structures that are already in place.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to see how those two commentators we looked at, how they had such wildly different reactions to his whole message.
It's true. One guy was like, this guy's a hero, he's telling the truth. And the other one was basically like, whoa, this is dangerous, this guy's a radical.
It just goes to show you the same event, the same words can be seen in completely opposite ways depending on, you know, where you're coming from.
Totally. And it highlights how important it is to think critically about things.
Yeah.
Like, we can't just accept everything we hear at face value, you know. We have to really look at the evidence, consider all the different viewpoints, and come to our own conclusions.
And that's really what this whole deep dive is all about. It's not about us telling you what to think. It's about giving you the information and the tools to think for yourself, you know?
Right, because at the end of the day, it's up to each person to decide what they believe.
And then to actually act on those beliefs.
Exactly. We're living in a time where things are changing so fast and there's a lot of uncertainty, but that also means there's a huge opportunity for things to get better, for real progress.
Yeah, it's up to all of us to create the kind of future we want to see.
And I think Traoré's vision, even if you don't agree with all of it, is an important part of that conversation. It forces us to ask some really tough questions about who we are, what's fair, and how power works in the world.
So, as we wrap things up here, we want to leave you with something to think about. How does Traoré's vision, his call for return, connect with all the conversations happening right now about, you know, reparations for slavery, racial justice, and global inequality?
It's a really tangled web of issues, and honestly, there are no simple answers.
But even just starting to think about these things, starting to ask these questions, is how we begin to imagine a world that's more just and more equal for everyone.
So keep digging, keep asking those tough questions, and keep pushing for a better future. Don't let the conversation end here.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.